occasionally you'll have something like, you know, a versus, which is a cradle song, or barcarolle, which is a boat song, things like that. But he was someone who wrote lots and lots of character pieces, and for that reason he's sometimes called a miniaturist, that he worked in these smaller little forms. And these character pieces didn't have so much to do with thematic, motivic thematic development, but more to do with just creating an atmosphere, creating a mood. And so he was a great master of the character piece in the 19th century. So just to recap what a character piece has to do with, it's a short work for keyboard, often with a programmatic element that has to do with creating mood. That's the main idea of a character piece. It's lyrical typically, although not always. So someone like Felix Mendelssohn would write little character pieces that he would call songs without words. You know, that's an example of a character piece. Or Grieg wrote character pieces that he called lyric pieces. And then he would give little descriptive titles to each of those, like Puck or Elfin Dance or whatever. So the majority of Chopin's works are in this style. He did write some sonata cycle works. So there are 3 piano sonatas. As I mentioned, a couple of concertos that use, you know, double exposition idea, first movement concerto form, rondo forms. But in general, he was just not so much concerned with the idea of this formal logic, but more having to do with an intuitive emotional expression. And so I put here, because of that, that he's often described as a miniaturist, someone who wrote in shorter little tongue poems. All right. So this first work is the last etude from the Opus 10 set. In total, there are 12 etudes in this set. He also then, this was written at the very end, the 1820s, and the last one was written in 1831. And then he wrote another set of 12. Opus 25 etudes. And this was from the 1830s. And then there are 3 posthumous etudes. What does posthumous mean?
Published after his dying.
All right, so they're published after he died, so they weren't published in his lifetime. This is a really important set for the pianist and just in general. This establishes the idea of the concert etude. So you know, etude means study. It has a technical purpose. So they all have a technical element. There are a couple that are slow that have to do with, tone quality, production issues, controlling, the sound, but most of them have to do with technical patterns, like scales or arpeggios or chromatic scales with the top 3 fingers of your hand, or octaves or sixths or thirds, so all these different patterns. That are patterns that a pianist has to learn to negotiate. And so you've all, those of you that are instrumentalists have studied etudes on your own particular instrument. These, though, take it another step, which is that not only do they help to develop the skill of the player and the technique of the player, but they're great works of art, and they're intended to be performed in concert. Hence the name concert etude. So, we'll write here, artistic merit transcends the technical purpose. So, on piano, you start to have etudes, study pieces that are written in the classical period, which is the era during which music instruction manuals were starting to be written. I mentioned the year, that decade of the 1750s when you have C.P.E. Bach and Quantz and Leopold Mozart writing instructional manuals for their instruments. So etudes started to become, a basic part of the pedagogical literature. And so you have, etudes by Hanon and so forth, and but these weren't meant to be played in a concert. You wouldn't go out and play da 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 da. So this starts then a whole new type of work then that continues to be associated with piano writing in the Romantic period. So Liszt continues this. Debussy at the end of the century. Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, they all write really important concert etudes. All right. Now, so that's one aspect. So they typically focus on one technical pattern and then continuously develop that. So it's very much like what you have in a Bach prelude, many of the Bach preludes from the well-tempered era. So it's that idea of, one mood. Typically, these are in a 3-part harmonic plan. Which means you have an opening section in time that returns in time. It's sometimes not real clear where the middle section begins because it continues the same pattern. But it usually has to do with a shift of harmony into a modulate to a different region, a different key. And these then typically end with a virtuosic conclusion, with a virtuosic coda. So the one that we're going to listen to is Opus 10, number 12. This has a nickname of revolutionary. So it's known as the Revolutionary Etude. That nickname comes from an apocryphal story, which is just a legend that, where the nickname was derived, that Chopin heard in 1831 that Russian troops had invaded Warsaw and that his family was in danger, and in this fit of despair, he sat down and improvised this etude. Anyway, it has a very dramatic element to it, for sure, very emotional element. This is an etude that focuses on developing the left hand arpeggios, and so you have this continuous running, pattern in the left hand. So the melody's in the right hand, it's in octaves. The left hand has these arpeggiated accompaniment patterns that are continuous in 16th notes. It's in a ternary form, so it's a typical Chopin etude in that sense, so the form of this is ternary. The date is 1831. Just to give you an idea of how bad a taste, some of the pianists of that era could be. There was one pianist, his name was Dreischock, whose claim to fame was being able to play the revolutionary etude with octaves in the left hand. So when you see this score and you hear how fast it is, you can imagine how loud that would be and how bad taste that is. But anyway, it was the age of the virtuoso. So that was really popular. One thing that you'll hear when the A theme returns is that Chopin embellishes it. He animates it. He adds extra notes to it. He adds some chromatic extra notes. And so that's one thing in general, that when Chopin would repeat an idea, he would embellish it. He wouldn't just literally restate it, but he would add things to it. Okay, so we're going to stop there for right now. And